I will start by saying you're Robert Siegel. You've reported on a million different cases of unrest. You've seen the Soviet Union fall. You've told me in the past how you sort of had one of your formative experiences in the Colombia unrest. What do you, is this like anything you've seen before? What do you see?
Well, I mean, to be fair, no, it's like nothing I've seen before, really. This was given that this took place in Washington, D.C., and given that this was a crowd of people who, a couple of whom carried Confederate flags, but who, for the most part, were wrapped in the stars and stripes with a sense of entitlement that this was their Congress to go in and break the windows of. And I found it unlike anything I've seen in actually, Washington is such a really beautiful city, certainly in its monumental center, that even protests that have a real edge of grievance to them are quite often rather happy and rather upbeat because you're in this beautiful mall and the monuments are very awe-inspiring and the buildings are beautiful. So the notion of of an angry, people call it a mood of insurrection, uh, and I have to admit, seeing that as an almost entirely white protest was all that was all pretty new. I'd have to search for any parallels. You mentioned my origins at in the undergraduate protests at Columbia, where I was the guy on the radio during that time.
Oh, you were covering them.
Covering it,
Yeah,
yes.
you
And
weren't out there protesting.
one thing that that took me right back yesterday was a picture of a rioter who'd broken into the Senate chamber and taken the seat of the vice president,
Yeah.
the chair on which the presiding officer of the Senate sits, whoever that may be. And it was an empty chamber, and there was this protester, rioter, whatever, sitting there. And it took me back to a photograph. I don't like the word iconic, but this, I think, achieved iconic status because it was a Life magazine photograph of a classmate of mine, actually, who in the sit-in at the university president's office at Columbia in 1968, dipped into the president's humidor and was seen smoking a presumably expensive cigar. In effect, adding insult to injury or vandalism. In effect, saying, "Here, big shot, look at me. I'm sitting in your seat of power and authority, and I'm invading the privacy of your desk."
Mm-hmm.
And that particular image took me back to the to 68, which for me, all of the past several 4 years has been for me the benchmark of craziness. That is, whenever anyone would say the country has never been this crazily divided or this angrily divided, I've always thought, well, we haven't had the equivalent of the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy.
A single year, yeah.
We haven't had as many universities flaring up one after the other in a very unpopular way. We didn't have someone running for president, George Wallace, who was not a dog whistle racist. He was a segregationist. And he actually, I checked recently, he only did 6 electoral votes worse than Barry Goldwater, who had run as a Republican 4 years earlier.
Wow.
In 1968. That's how well George Wallace did. He carried those. So for me, 68 has always been the standard for madness and for concerns about stability of the country. And I have to admit that over the past year, my confidence that 1968 was a loonier year and a more worrying year than recent years has been waning. And yesterday would certainly rank right up there in the tipping points for me.